Hey, and we're live. Welcome, everybody. It's Jürgen here, Polymash. I welcome you for another edition of our Podcast SEO Saturdays. And we've got a really exciting show for you today. And let's get started. Hey, everyone. And so again, it's Jürgen here from Polymash, and I am joined by my lovely wife and partner, as always, Robin from Polymash. Say hi, Robbie.
Hello, everybody, and welcome. We're very excited to be offering you another SEO Saturday live streaming.
So, and we have some cool guests today and some new and cool information to share, I hope. And we're going to do some live SEO for some folks on the show today. And so with that, it's a sunny day here in Florida. I know that, we are feeling very fortunate in the COVID-19 days. And, I'm just hoping everyone out there is staying safe, healthy, and, quarantined to the extent possible. So I hope everyone's all right.
Yeah, and so if you are there lurking around, please feel free to engage with us. Perhaps you could say hello in the chat space. It's always nice to know that we have some people out there, and we do have some special guests too. And if you just say hi, that's great. And if you care to share where you're from, it's always fun to know what kind of connections we're making across the nation, across the world.
Absolutely. And especially if you guys submitted an application for your podcast, please let us know that you're there and online. I think we're going to start with sort of just an overview of how this all works and maybe a little recap of what we've been doing the last few times. And we're changing the format of the show just slightly today. And I want to explain that in a minute. And so maybe what I'll do is I kind of just walk through what we're going to be sharing with you guys today. So this is kind of like a mini agenda. So bear with me, but do let us know if you're there in the comments because we do want to be able to answer and ask any of the questions that that you might have. So
yeah, do ask us questions. Keeps us on track.
So great. And what we're going to be doing, beyond the intro is I want to talk a little bit about how this works, the concept itself, and where you can submit your requests. And by requests, I mean that we are accepting people who apply for their own podcast to be live SEO'd on the air. And we give sort of preference to and select people who have some really relevant content, a relevant website, and for whom SEO is already a component or could be a good component of their podcast marketing strategy. Because that's, Robbie, you and I were recently fortunate enough to be at PodFest, and we presented some thoughts and information around how that all works. And in fact, the last few times that we did this show, we gave a little bit of a recap around why SEO for podcasters is such a powerful and increasingly popular way of marketing their shows. Because as we've been doing this since 2014 and we've launched a bunch of podcasts, what we've noticed in the last few years is that there's much more interest in promoting existing podcasts and learning how to do that than maybe just in starting new ones. Would you say, Robbie, we've had a lot of interest in the podcast marketing angle, wouldn't you say?
Absolutely, yeah. So people, they've put a lot of effort and investment and energy and emotion and intellect into their podcast. So why wouldn't you want to ensure that you can promote them in the very best way possible?
Yes, and so for us, SEO is a big part of that, and that's why we have a very easy to remember URL at polymash.com/live, and you can just go there and fill out, and send us some information about your podcast. Now, one benefit is that if you do that and we do talk about your podcast on the show, you get a great backlink from a high domain authority site. That's, we'll explain the value of that as we go on. We also sort of feature your podcast a little bit. And so instead, in addition to backlinks, we'll give you a nice shout out. That's that's how it works. And how we choose applications is sort of, we of course want to honor people who are joining us here live. So if you're on the chat and, and I see a bunch of people popping up and joining us, which is terrific. I see Rick is online and he's going to be a guest today. We'll talk about our guests in a minute, but basically how we choose applications is that what we do is we select folks that have applied online, but also where there are some good lessons. We've received a lot of applications where there are some really good examples to go through that other podcasters could learn from, or where they're either episode topics or domain names or URLs or even the names of the podcasts can be optimized using SEO. And so we're trying to, sort of strive for a mix of honoring folks that are here with us online, but also providing what I hope is good educational content for everyone. All right, so if you're not able to use the chat or if you need help, this is where to go. If your chat doesn't work, you can just join us directly on YouTube, or on Facebook. And there's some links on polymash.com/live. That's the go-to place, the jump-off place. But if you're on a mobile device and you're not seeing the chat, for example, you can just scroll down that page, and there are some links there where you can just jump off right into the YouTube channel, and and join us from there, if you will. So Robbie, any other folks in the chat room that we want to shout out?
Absolutely. So we have somebody who's just up the road from us in Tampa, and that's Mark Siegel.
Oh, awesome!
Welcome, Mark.
Welcome, Mark. I'm gonna.
Yep. And then we have somebody from the UK, which is extremely exciting. And that's Ask D Pros Media. I think I'm saying that right. Ask D Pros Media.
It's Ask the Pros. It's funny. That's a UK, that's a UK address with a bit of a Brooklyn accent built into the name of the show. I think. Ask
there
the
you
Pros.
Go. Okay, so I'm fumbling around, but it's okay to fumble.
No, that's funny. But yeah, so that's great. Mark, thank you for joining us. Then Rick, I'm not sure how am I pronouncing your name.
Ask D Pros. I get it.
You're getting it. So that's all fun and good. Anyway, so we just want to give a few shout outs to your show if you're joining us. Tell us about your podcast too in the comments if you are joining us, and and getting ready to ask any questions. And having gone through the application process, obviously we need some time to digest these as they come in. So thanks for the quick shout outs there, Robbie, and welcoming our chat guests. And today on the program itself, I'm hoping that CJ will be joining us live in the live stream or on chat. So if you're there, please do let us know.
Yeah, CJ sent us a lovely application, and we would love to engage with her.
And we're going to have it, but even if she's not on the live stream, she might be able to watch this later. So we're going to dip into her podcast a little bit. I'm hoping that Scott Power of the Not Real Art podcast, he's joined us on the chat before. And then also Rick, has been previously on the chat, but he's hopefully joining us on Skype today, which is going to be exciting. So we're going to have a conversation and maybe explore a little bit of his goals and his podcast, and and figure out whether we can collaborate on some SEO value there. And good. So
Jürgen.
No,
I was just going to say, it's always very exciting to engage with our guests, and I'm extremely excited about this particular session today because we're going to be sharing some new insights. So, I always love the learning piece. So, stay tuned for all of that great learning that's coming too.
Yeah, that's funny because, it was interesting this week. I was asked by someone, I consider myself more of an eternal student of SEO. It's not something that you ever, achieve mastery of to where you can say, okay, done. I know everything. There's because Google keeps changing the algorithms, the landscape changes. And so just like Robin just said, we consider ourselves eternal. We're paying attention. We're good students, but nonetheless, like I was chatting to someone earlier earlier this week, and they were saying, well, I'm learning Adobe Audition. It doesn't seem all that hard. And I sort of had a chuckle to myself because after, 14 years or 10 years of using Adobe Audition, there's still stuff and there's still approaches that I'm learning. And, so it just never ends, which is, I suppose, a good thing. Right?
And that goes back to your pre-podcasting days when you were a musician and a composer.
That's right? Yes.
So you're well experienced in all that audio stuff.
And I'm just seeing that Mark is actually sharing with us his show. Yep. It's called Third Opinion, and it was a broadcast radio program a year ago, and so now launching as a podcast this coming week. That's awesome. First of all, we're working with some radio people from the United Nations. One of the podcasts that we produce and market for them. Is
ex-BBC.
Is an ex-BBC podcaster and radio guy. Mm-hmm. And so what's always funny is that the show format sounds like a radio show, so that he'll have a segment from a guest and he'll go, and that was, and that was, so-and-so telling us about, so there's a particular radio flair. And I think, I think radio has really upped the game, NPR and everyone else who's joined. I think that the overall quality of podcasts, it's really raised the level for everyone. And so, I think good luck with your launch. I think that's awesome.
That's great, Mark.
Good. So, show segments for the day then are going to be, we're in the middle of it now, sort of the recap of why SEO for podcasting is important. Now, in the past, I've repeated some of the content that we presented at the PodFest conference this year for this segment, and I won't do that this time. And why? Because if you just go to polymash.com/live and look, there is a free video course that we've created from the content that we presented at PodFest this year. And that is a perfect primer to this topic. So if you're here because you already realize that SEO is the thing for podcast marketing, and is the most cost-effective and listener effective and business effective way of promoting your show, then welcome. But if you don't quite realize or you're not sure what's the role of SEO, why are we even mentioning SEO, why are we excited about it as after 14 years of podcasting marketing, why are we focusing on it so much? Then please go to polymash.com/live and avail yourself of this free resource. So I want to start today with an update from Backlinko and Brian Dean. Brian Dean founded a site called Backlinko, which is an authority site to the 10th degree. He's really a long-term SEO and basically dominates. As you can imagine, the term and ranking for the word SEO or anything related is pretty hard because that's what the game is for everyone. And he totally does. He rules that space. And so he's had some very interesting insights with some confirmation of things that we may already know, and a lot of things that maybe are a little bit surprising, and for us also some greater insights that I'm hoping are going to be valuable also for the guests that we have on the show today, because they play into and enhance the things that they already are doing in terms of using SEO for their show. As part of that, there is a somewhat sad case study of how some people on SEO are eating my lunch on Polymash. This is sort of the how do you call that, Robin? It's the shoemaker's shoes always leak, or the plumber's house always leak?
No, the shoemaker's shoes don't leak.
No, they have holes in them.
They have no soles in them.
Well, they would leak with holes in them, wouldn't they?
But eventually. The plumber's house often has a leaking roof.
All right.
In other words, we often don't look after ourselves because we're so busy looking after other people.
Anyway, so, I had some content. I rank for quite a few podcast terms. Yippee, on page 1 of Google. And actually, that's where most of our clients come from. But occasionally, there are some posts that I really put a lot of thought into. And, they fell off the first place. And they fell off the first. Well, we'll take a look. I've got a little bit of a sad story to tell here. And on that vein, sorry, that's not really an appropriate segue, but I'm hoping to delve into the Sorry to Hear That podcast, and that's CJ's submission that she sent us for the show. And we're also hoping to jump on and talk a little bit about the Not Real Art podcast and see whether any of these updates from Backlinko and the the short segment that I'm going to do at the beginning to talk about some of these insights that have been published and what they mean for podcasters. I want to discuss some of that with Scott Power from Not Real Art Podcast, so I'm hoping that he'll join us. And then last but not least, also Rick from the Outdoor Biz Podcast is going to tell us about his show, share a little bit about what he's doing, and we have some thoughts and to share with him as well. So great, and then we'll just wrap up and talk about what had happened next month. So that's the plan for today. Does that sound good?
And I'd like to reframe your sad story, Jürgen. I'd like to say it's an evolutionary story.
That's a very good way. That's a very nice reframe.
You're moving from what your strengths are to even more strengths.
That's a nice thought. Thank you. I'll switch over to a bit of a different view here. Just forgive me as I reposition myself, and don't mind that I'm suddenly in reverse. It's this presentation tool that I'm using for this part of the presentation. But let me make you familiar with Brian Dean of Backlinko. And he published an article that he has been updating for a while with just really important must-know type information that will help us all get more visitors to our websites, get our content to actually rank on hopefully the front page of Google, and all of the things that we're talking about in terms of content marketing for podcasts. He is the go-to guy. So that is at backlinko.com/ search engine ranking. If you want to check that out after the show, we will have links to all of this in our show notes, of course, and in the article on and you can just find those also just by going to polymash.com/live. On the bottom there's an archive of our previous shows, and shortly after early next week we're going to have a recap of this session. And, Robin has been kind enough to provide some awesome show notes for these recaps. And that's going to go live, sometime in the middle of the week, probably, I would say, Robbie, right? Mm-hmm. Yeah. All right. So he has, Brian Dean from Backlinko then, has been updating this, this post of his. And I want to highlight, that's a really long, all of his stuff is like 10,000 words long. And I want to just take maybe 10 minutes for this segment. So there are some things in here that are not all that surprising, but that were kind of confirming of things that we all know and have been talking about. And the first insight is that authoritative domains tend to rank higher in Google's search results. So the domain authority that we've always talked about, and that when we're using tools like to research episode topics, for example, and we're trying to understand whether those topics have a chance of ranking, what we look at is our own site domain authority and the results in the first 10 search results. And the tool that we're using for that is called KW Finder. Again, a link on polymash.com/live. Actually, the link itself to that tool is polymash.me/KW Finder. And that's our affiliate link. So if you find value in these tools, and sometimes we can get you a break in signing up. A lot of these have free initial signups, and we can give you a coupon code for signing up for them. But anyway, that is when we pay attention to authoritative domains. And so what he shared with us is this. So let me try and explain this graph. And I know, Robbie, you had a question about this possibly. But what we're looking at here are for the top 10 positions in the search results for any key phrase. So think of this as your episode. If your episode, was to make it into the top 10 of Google of the Google search results, typically on average, the domain authority of those top 10 is pretty high. But I don't want you to be discouraged, because you can see that even domains in the 20s or 30s or even lower than that do rank occasionally. And in our free video course, we had some really cool strategies of A, how to boost your domain, and B, how to sort of like hack your podcast name itself through domain redirects or choosing the name of your podcast wisely. If already people are searching for things like therealestatepodcast.com, if you can get a domain like that, you will rank on page 1 and get a lot of traffic from that. So even though it's a brand new site and your domain authority might be very, very low in here, so there are some ways to overcome that. But on average, the key takeaway here is that higher domain ratings result, or correlate with your ability to rank a little bit higher. Now, if you don't know what your domain rank is, there's a free checker tool that's available. I'll leave it up here on the screen for a minute. And again, we'll put this link into the chat and into our our show notes as well. So that's at ahrefs.com/website-authority-checker. That is the free domain authority checker, and you can sort of see what your own website ranks as, and your subsequent decisions on whether you're promoting content and what episodes you might target with low keyword difficulty, still some traffic, and that are commensurate with your domain authority. So
Jürgen Mark's asking, would you please define domain authority?
Yes, I see that. So thank you, Mark, for that question. So domain authority is a industry term that got invented by a company called Moz. And it's a rank from 0 to 100. And, if I go back to this graph again, from 0 to 100, the domains, so Google would be at 100, google.com, right? Facebook, Wikipedia, they're maybe in the 80s. EDU domains, meaning universities, typically have a very high domain authority and domain ranking. Whereas a brand new site starts with sort of a 0. To grow these, this is an interesting thing that I learned, is that it's logarithmic, meaning if you've got a domain authority of 4 for a brand new site, it's a lot easier to get to 10, 15, or 20 than it is to move one that's in the 60s, into 65 or 70. So it gets harder the higher up your domain authority goes. But it's basically is a predictor of how likely you are to be in the top search results. So just creating great content, just creating an awesome piece of content, that is one part of the job. But, having a domain authority that is high is another part of the job. And so to give you an example, Polymash, my own blog that's been around for maybe 10 years or so, is in the 30s. But I rank on page 1 for a bunch of terms. So, this is just the average of search results that are being talked about here. So does that make sense? I'm hoping that helps clarify it.
Yeah, and let me jump in, Jürgen. I think each of these insights that you're offering, or these takeaways, is part of a whole ecosystem. So one thing just doesn't work on its own. So all of these things are interdependent. And obviously domain authority, which is correlated to also the age, you're talking about the longevity of the site, the URL, yes, and I think, that's also relevant. But all of these things support each other. And I think here with the domain authority, that's probably an overarching, if you've been around a long time, and if you have a lot of backlinks coming into you, your authority in your subject matter is going to grow. And I think that's part of the, what we're seeking to achieve here, how we can assist growing your authority in your space.
Yes, I think that's an excellent point. And, I like that you highlight that domain authority isn't something that's easy to change. It's not something that you can actively work on. It's based on age. So, a 10-year-old site will earn domain authority automatically.
If it's been active.
If it's been active and if it has good content. I think that all these other factors factor in. So you can boost your domain authority gradually going up. Links, we're going to explain a little bit about what drives it and what you can do to grow your domain authority. But when you are first starting out, again, watch the little free course that we have. There are a couple of tricks that, that apply for brand new podcasts on how to hack your domain authority and get around and get like an initial boost when you first launch your show and have it be on page 1 of the search results, almost in a guaranteed sort of way. But that only works if you're still early enough to be willing to change not the name of your podcast, but the name of your website and get a domain that, that attracts some traffic. Anyhow, so domain authority this is something that a lot of us that have been working on this, and also the guests that we're going to have on today's show, they're already aware and they're baking that into their thinking process. So domain authority is a key factor, and higher ranking domains just have a better chance at where everything else becomes a little bit easier. So the second one is that the website's overall domain authority had a stronger impact and correlation to being able to rank than the page itself. And what I mean by that is, if you every episode that you produce, every article that you write, if you're a blogger, has what's called a page authority, which is similar to domain authority, but just is limited to and constrained to the page that you're talking about, or episode. In the case, an episode show note article on your site, for example, would have a certain page authority. But the overall domain authority of your site is more important, I think, is what the insight here was, than the authority of any particular page. So you can have a fantastic page covering a topic comprehensively, but your overall website domain authority still will have a pretty big factor. So basically, put it another way, hang on. Sorry, I was moving on to the next one. No, so I think, is that clear, Robin? Did I mess that up, or does that make sense?
And these are affirming takeaways, because this is what we've been promoting since day one, I guess.
Yeah. So page authority. I mean, so your domain authority matters. That's basically what it comes down to. And so the next one that I wanted to go dive into a little bit is that this idea of getting backlinks, and pages or episodes with more backlinks tend to rank higher than pages with fewer backlinks. And, this, I mean, if Scott and or Rick are already on, they kind of already know that one of the methods that we use is when we publish an episode, we publish it to multiple places. We think of it as content syndication of show notes. So we're publishing our episodes, and we're using a StoryChief system. Again, links on our webpage for that. But we're using something to where, just like when you're distributing your podcast to iTunes, and it then gets syndicated out to all of the other podcast directories outwards, right? So it gets sent to Spotify and everywhere else after you publish it on iTunes. That feed is also a strategy that we're using to create backlinks to our episode pages. And that means that when we publish our episodes, there's an entry on blogger.com. We may have an entry on Medium. We'll have an entry on StoryChief's internal blog, and we'll publish to our own primary website, which might be on WordPress or another content management system. So why is that important? Is because all of those other places instantly link to your one article and create what the language is here is called backlinks, right? So you can create backlinks right when you publish an article, and the more you have, the better. And what I wanted to show is that here is the graph that explains how many links. So you can see that in the top 10 search results, I mean, the vast majority of pages don't even have any links, but we're leaving those out. So let's assume that you publish to Medium, that's one link, to Blogger, that's another link, to your own website. I mean, that doesn't count, that's your primary. But to StoryChief, and let's say that you get your guest to promote your podcast and ask them to write a small piece on their website or link to your episode in their media page, or there are a number of different ways in which you could think about trying to get as many backlinks as possible to each episode that you publish. Does that make sense? Robbie, do you have anything is there a better way to explain that? the concept of backlinks?
Well, we can see if we have any questions, and that will give us a clue.
Well, by all means, folks, ask.
I think that's I think that's good, Jürgen, because it's. I think always the challenge is to ask your guests to give you a backlink.
Yes, I mean that's
an
obvious
things.
For podcasters. Yeah. That's an obvious thing. The
reciprocation of I've been on your show. Let their audience know how to actually listen to your show on your website.
That's an easy one, right? And I mean, StoryChief also has this concept of ambassadors, for example, and ambassadors are people who you have an agreement with, is that you help sponsor each other's stuff, right? So if you link to someone else, they might link back to you. And the more of that is happening for an episode or for a page and for your website in overall, the more backlinks you start earning, the better chances you have to rank on page one. In fact, the correlation is so strong that the number one result, the thing that sits in the very first search result, usually has 3.8 more links than backlinks than the results in number 2 and number 3 and so forth. So you can see that it's a pretty drastic curve here, right? So on average it looks like it was I don't know if this is a logarithmic scale, but like a 20, 30 backlinks or so. If you get 20, 30 backlinks to an article, you've got an excellent chance of getting yourself onto page one. So great, let's move on. The next insight from him were, here's the key takeaway from this part is that while Google, and hang on, I was on the wrong screen. The key takeaway from this part is that while Google keeps, adding factors to their algorithms, backlinks still rule. That's by far the most important indicator that that you have a chance of getting onto page one. So backlinks rule. Another word about backlinks is that it's the number of referring domains, meaning the number of different websites that link to you have an influence on ranking. And to put that another way, it's basically saying it's better to get 10 links from 10 different sites than 10 links from one and the same site, right? So if the Robin's Positivity Strategist podcast links to me at Polymash and gives me some kudos, the value, if I get 50 or 60 links from Robin, there's a diminishing set of returns, although for pages it does matter. And Robbie, for you're in a situation where you're working with someone who's sponsoring your season right now and you're getting lots of backlinks from that one domain.
So actually my season 5 goes live this Tuesday, and I'm being sponsored and collaborating with a particular institute, Taos Institute. It's a kind of an educational podcast, and so every episode I'll be linking to them, but the value of my linking to them all the time, and they'll be linking back to me. So what this is showing us that it'd be lovely if all the guests, and I will encourage them to do that, also link in. So we'll have a variety and diversity of all the backlinks and the referring domains.
Yeah, that would be awesome, right? Because you would get, out of 10 episodes out of one season, the goal is to get 10 new domains linking to you from 10 different sites. So anyway, I hope that's clear. So those were, these are not that surprising for us at the moment yet, but there are a couple of surprises coming up in Brian Dean's research that I'm going through here. And one is that short URLs tend to rank better than long URLs. And there was actually a great example of that last week. If we look at, he actually threw in a graphic too, Brian Dean did. So you can see that the top search results in Google have shorter URLs. And why is that important? It's more URLs that indicate what the thing is about, but that aren't very long. And, the insight for me is use and reduce your URL slugs. That's the part where it's like polymash.com/my-story-about- I am going on and on and on now with this URL and making it long. When it's long like that, your key phrase, which you want to use in your domain, in your article URL. The thing that you would like people to find you through, the key phrase should be part of your URL, but it should be at the beginning, and it should, and keep it short. Maybe if your entire article was really long, just reduce it to the key phrase, reduce the slug or the rest of the URL just to the key phrase if you can. We actually had, some sites have more systemic issues with that, and actually I think CJ's site, we found something like that. Here's an example from last week. Let me just show you this. So, last week we had the Creative Outhouse folks on with a great podcast that they're working on. And I noticed that their URLs were structured like this. They had the date and had the URL after that. Now, they've fixed that since then. And I don't know, let me see whether I can pull up our Trello board here. Hang on a second. I think that so we suggested, and we gave them some tools to where that wouldn't hurt them to change in the middle of changing something like this in the middle of being live and having links being shared. You could potentially break some things by changing your permalink structure on the site, but they did. And now when I'm actually clicking on the short URL, I noticed that it actually opens. You can see that it's no longer the long URL. Now they just have the key phrase, presumably, that they wanted to hit as part of the URL. So we were happy to see that they were able to implement that out of what we were talking about. So does that make sense? So here's the first surprise, and this one caught me sort of off. Page loading speed doesn't really have a correlation with rankings. And, for a lot of us in the SEO space, and, you might have also heard this from time to time, is that like, hey, your site should load fast, and that makes a big difference. And it does make a difference in terms of, user experience and, and people sort of clicking away. But in terms of ranking and getting a piece of content onto page one, it doesn't seem to have any correlation. And so, why is that? Google has this thing called a speed update that they published not too long ago. And here's what they said. They said that speed update it's more like a penalty for the slowest pages out there, the slowest experience to users. So it's more a penalty for being super slow than a reward for being super fast. I guess that's how I would put it. But I was a little bit surprised, by that particular insight.
I know, because many of us used to fret, it's taking so long to load.
It's taking too long to load. It's
impacting my Google rankings.
And we install plugins. I mean, we do focus on that. And I'm not by any means saying, okay, you can forget that. But in terms of if your thought process was that, oh my God, I'm going to lose my first position for a key phrase because my website has gotten slower, or I haven't, it's not as fast, or there's something that I need to work on. I think that sort of puts it to rest, unless it's really egregiously impacting user experience. I would say that it's okay. It was a surprise. I'm not giving a recommendation to ignore.
Was it a relief, Jürgen? No, I mean, when you say a surprise, was it what kind of surprise?
It's a positive surprise. I was like fretting about something that maybe I didn't need to be fretting about in the way that I was fretting about.
So a relief.
It's a relief, but that still means
it could
that
change again, right? Too.
Yeah, they might do something at some point, right? I mean, anyway. So here's the next one, and this one also may seem obvious. Websites with above average time on site tend to rank higher in Google. So that means when somebody comes and looks at your episode, post, or article. I think podcasters here have a great advantage because we've seen that website listening stats are up. There are some Pod News this week actually published some more statistics, and COVID has actually driven down listening overall by 20-25% at the moment, at least. So I think because people aren't in their cars or running, or their usual routines were interrupted, and
Different behaviors.
different behaviors, I think is what folks are hypothesizing, that's what's behind it. But what they did notice also is that listening on websites is up. And so where I'm going with that is that podcasters have a baked-in advantage because they have a little player widget on the top of their page. And we hear from our clients that people love to listen to the episode and then scroll through the show notes to see what's going on. However, so what does that mean for podcasters? What can we do about this? The key insight for me is that you have to reduce your bounce rate and increase engagement and sort of try to keep people engaged with your content longer. Because here's the sort of ugly truth of this. There is something called bounce rate. And bounce rate is when somebody goes to a single page on your site, like an episode that they found, and they look at that and they scroll through and then they leave. That's a bounce as far as Google is concerned. Google doesn't measure how long people stay on your site automatically. It just doesn't do that. So unless they click on a related piece of content or take some other action, or some people do it with timed pop-ups, so there are ways in which you can mitigate that. But basically, if somebody goes to your site and spends a half an hour there, Google still sort of dings you for it with what's called a page bounce. So that's not fair, is it? So actually, what I wanted to focus on here for a second is there is a plugin in WordPress that helps. It's called Reduce Bounce Rate WordPress plugin. Just Google that, look it up, because that plugin does the following. It communicates back with Google and lets Google know that people are engaging and scrolling on your site. And it can do that by scroll percentage. It does it every couple of seconds. And so and Google is fine with that. That's not a black hat technique or anything shady. That's just more fairly and honestly reflecting what people's behavior with your content and with your episode article or with your blog post, really is about. So that would be my guidance here is that do take advantage of that WordPress plugin if you've never heard of it before.
And Jürgen, what if in writing up your show notes, you have long-form show notes, so you're kind of dotting all the I's and crossing the T's. Would it be to your advantage then not to hyperlink to your guest's name or guest website in the first line, for example, because that might take them off your page? How does that
that's
work?
Interesting, isn't it?
So you would give the link to them later on, right? Just curious.
So I mean, in a way, if you were to link to your own content and keep them on your site, Google would be recognizing that and crediting you for that, and the engagement score would go up. Definitely wouldn't count as a quote unquote bounce. Mm-hmm. But if you were to go in and link to someone else and they jump off your site, well, it's an engagement with your site, but then they're off, mm-hmm. and they may not come back. So how do you deal with that? I mean, my guidance would be maybe put all of the internal links, in the body up front, but the external links, put them on the bottom.
Yeah. Good.
Does that make sense?
Yeah. Thanks.
Yeah. So.
Any other questions from our watchers out there?
So you guys, as online, I see Scott has joined us. Thank you. We've got a few folks that
keep the questions popping up.
That are joining us, which is awesome. Thank you for thank you for that. Yeah, so we're scrolling through the folks that have joined us. Thanks. So keep coming. If any of this isn't clear, please just put it in the chat, and hopefully we're going to have a little back and forth with our guests here in a minute too. So anyway, the next insight, and this is where it gets a little more interesting, is something also that Scott and other folks that have been to our attended our workshops would realize, is that long form content tends to rank higher. But the insight for me was a little different. It's that it ranks higher because it attracts more links. So it's not the number of words that are important. And that kind of was, that was sort of not a surprise, but it was just a reframing or a good reminder for me, is that the word count alone doesn't make the difference, but having backlinks makes the difference. And what happens is that when you're writing articles that are, no one links to this, no one links to really super short articles from their site. If I'm going to provide a piece of reference, if I'm going to provide an insight article about something, the likelihood is that article is, 1,000, 2,000, 3,000, or even longer. And so it just seems that the longer the content is, the more words it has, the more likely it is to attract backlinks. But that's the reason that these longer form pieces of content rank higher. And that was a slight twist on that theme for me. And that sort of segues into the next thing that I want to talk about, and that's really the jump off. This is the last thing, but this is really the jump off point for a discussion that I'm looking forward in the coming weeks as well. And so what Brian found is that comprehensive content strongly correlates with higher rankings. And so now you might ask, what's comprehensive content? I'll give you a definition from them in a moment. But so it's not the number of words alone, but it's something else. And what is it? So comprehensive content in their definition is where you cover an entire topic on a single post or page. And so for podcasters, that raised some questions for me, right? Is it feasible? And for some podcasts, this answer is a definite yes. And for other podcasts, it might require some thinking about it. But so could you cover an entire topic comprehensively in a single episode? Now that got me thinking, and it got me thinking. Well, let me go into here's the graphic. I can't blow it up or zoom in as well on this particular graphic. But basically what he's showing is that content grading through platforms like ClearScope, Phrase, and Topic. There are a number of different platforms that help with this, and I'm going to show you this in my little sad case study that I mentioned at the beginning. But the key takeaway for me is, writing comprehensive, in-depth content is what helps pages rank. Not necessarily the fact that it's 7,000 words. It's the fact that all topics are covered, or whoever covers the most topic about something. So I was thinking for Scott, for example, he wants to, and we're going to have this conversation in a minute, but just to get him thinking about this. For example, if you wanted to cover the topic of graffiti art for your Not Real Art podcast, could you have a conversation with someone? Could you structure your interview where if you knew what would be a comprehensive coverage of that topic, what are the top 10 competitors doing that are ranking, what topics do they go into? If you knew that ahead of time, couldn't you structure your episodes to cover all of those things? And then by the time that you get a transcript and write your article for the show notes, you would have the ability to cover all those topics. That's where my thinking led here. And so yeah, like that's what I mean for podcasters is, can episodes cover an entire topic in one single episode? And so I'm still evolving my thinking. Robbie, I don't know, with you, what your thinking is on that now. I think this is a point of discussion. I think maybe the answer is sometimes that may seem obvious and a great idea, and that other times, you kind of just ignore that part of the advice and you don't attempt it. So.
Well, I can, just a thought just came to mind, and I could use an analogy of a book and chapters, for example. So each chapter might be very comprehensive around a specific topic for the overarching book. Mm-hmm. So if each episode is contained in terms of what the topic might be, then that could be comprehensive. And
explores it fully, right?
And I think the other thing, it presupposes that, we are intentional about what the topic is. So, what are we podcasting about today? Whether I'm a solo podcast or whether I'm interviewing somebody, How can I be very clear and intentional about the topic and share that with my guest, perhaps in advance, unless, like me, you have this preference for spontaneity. It's more challenging to do that. But, I think all of these takeaways and these insights are to just help us to think more strategically about the content that we're creating.
I think that's excellent. I think, to be continued, right? Because what the really exciting part for me is what comes out of this, and also, for example, back catalog, right? Back catalog work of, if you have, because the strategy that we often advise people to take, and actually, Robbie, that's something that you're working on back catalog as optimization for quite a few clients. And the strategy that we're taking is that focus on the stuff that's on page 2, right? Focus on the things that have just fallen off of the top of the search results, because that they're rank already. And if you had an analysis that said, hey, your content grade, and this is a term that I'm going to introduce here because that's what it's all about. Your content grading is a B or a C. And if you wanted to be on the top of the search results, your content grading, which measures how comprehensively you cover something. Okay, that's what a content grade is. Your content grade is now an A+, so that it will help you compete with and get on page 1 for those search results. So with that, maybe the key insight for me is starting to think beyond what we're already doing, which is basic SEO, right? So for us who are using StoryChief, foundational SEO with Yoast, with StoryChief, with KW Finder, with where we are intentional about the way that we're designing our episode articles in order for them to rank and drive some traffic and have new listeners discover our show on the website. And that's, again, for those folks like Mark, or for other few folks that are on for the first time, like the course really explains and gives some case studies on what an awesome technique that is, that people are taking. So let me do the mea culpa, my own sad case study.
Your evolutionary story.
My evolutionary story. Thank you. It's like we're living in a sad time right now, but maybe we're living in an evolutionary time too.
We are indeed.
So here's an example of something that I used to rank for page 1 podcast promotion.
And Jürgen, all of this is in the context of comprehensive content. Is that, just give us a context for.
Yes. So the ranking, I had this post, one of my hero posts, right? One of the cornerstones of my content strategy. And it happens to not be a podcast episode. And I think that, that's okay. It doesn't matter. But I had written this guide on how to promote your podcast. And, it's a really long form piece where I thought I had pretty comprehensively covered the topic, and I would have thought that I would get a pretty good grade. But what I discovered was that
you did for some time.
Well, I did for some time, right? But now they're eating my lunch, right? So what's happened is, and actually you can see on the graph, you can see that the interest in promoting a podcast has been picking up, over time. And so that also means that more competitors coming up. And it turns out that there are the people who are now ranking on the top of the search results for that term, only recently wrote these articles, and so that caused me to drop, and I'm now off the first page. And so, what should I be doing about that? And so, content grading. Then, this is where I'm playing with this tool, and this is almost at the end of this. What content grading does is, you see that on this tool, I got a B+ for that article, and I thought I'd done better. But I'm using a system here called Topic, and it did an analysis and provided me a content brief saying, hey, if you want to rank for that, these are the topics that you should cover. And look, I missed some. Like, I didn't talk about a target audience for podcasters. I didn't talk about getting business cards printed, and other sorts of things. So I went back and basically fixed those things and filled the gaps, right? So my content grade before was a B+, and now I followed their advice, went back into StoryChief, added some additional bits of content to my post, and now I'm getting a A++ in the topic engine. So here it's actually, we're looking at it live now. But so two things that jumped out at me that I want to explore is, one, if I just type in how to promote a podcast, and if I had an interview with someone on that, if I didn't have this piece of content already, or if this was like, for example, graffiti art or the best graffiti art, if I was trying to design an experience around that, these sorts of content briefs will tell you what you need. So for how to promote a podcast, I needed at least an A, but now I got an A++. Okay, and so here are the outlines of what my competitors have written about. Here is a list of the questions that I should be answering in such an episode or in such an article. And I, for the most part, kind of do that. Here are some topics to cover and what the weight is. So social media, by far, for people promoting a podcast, that seems to be a very popular topic. If I was to write an article and expect it to rank for how to promote your podcast, and I didn't talk about social media at all, then I can tell you that that article wouldn't get a good content grade and I wouldn't rank, right? So that's what the purpose of this kind of a tool is. And so the exciting news is that I reached out, I've been having some conversations with them, and they'll join us in 2 weeks from now and tell us a little bit about this tool. And they are very excited about shaping a tool like this to be useful for podcasters. In other words, give you an interview crib sheet. If you do some research and you say, hey, I want to have an episode with Man One, a famous graffiti artist, and we're going to cover everything there is to know about graffiti art in that episode, or at least touch on it, or at least give me a report card like this that's going to give me a guidance to that. That's the idea here. So I'm hoping that kind of makes sense. And with that was the quick demo. So we kind of like finished that already. So with that, maybe we'll jump into, helping some people, with their actual content. So I'm hoping that this has been useful. Mark, I appreciate you saying that's been real valuable for you. I'm happy to see that.
Yeah, I'd be curious to know if anyone in the chat space, if there are any aha moments for you, any insights that you gained from Jürgen sharing that latest piece that he was involved in researching. So yeah, just let us know if you have any insights.
Yes.
Or meaning for you.
So, with that, maybe what I'm going to do is just quickly jump on, to the Sorry to Hear That podcast from CJ. I'm going to see whether I can jump right in. So CJ has a podcast where it's a podcast about a community around grief. And she interviews people who talk about death of loved ones and talk about their processing of that grief. And so I guess that's where the title came from. Sorry to Hear That was a phrase that she heard all the time afterwards. And she sent us a request to see whether we could do and look into opportunities for podcast episodes. So she wants to optimize her transcript so that her SEO gets better. And this is a passion project. It's a new website. And, she gave us some content here on episode ideas, and we sort of did a little bit of a look. I mean, her domain authority right now is only 5, and that means it's pretty hard. It's still a new site, and it's pretty hard to rank right off the bat. But I'm going to send you an article from ReliableSoft on how to increase domain authority, and we'll put that into our show notes as well. But another thing that I noticed was that one place that you could do, CJ, what you could do is your actual episode pages. So here's you've got a great site, you've got the episode pages there. I can click through and, actually see the individuals ones. But now this jumped out to me. What we heard earlier was that short URLs are better than long URLs. So for example, if Mother's Day thoughts, that might be a great key phrase, but it would be better if the URL was sorrytohearthatpodcast.com/ instead of more episodes, leave that out if you can, and change your permalink structure to just be sorrytohearthatpodcast.com/ Mother's Day thoughts. And then I looked into a couple of opportunities. Death of a grandparent, for example. If I go and jump over to KW Finder, which is our go-to platform for initial keyword research, death of a grandparent here is a relatively easy, for the folks who haven't seen it, on the right side of the screen. We basically get ideas around additional other key phrases. But if you were to pick death of a grandparent as your key phrase, then your episode title should have that in it exactly. So it could be how to deal with death of a grandparent. Look at this one, 25 score. It has 1,500 people searching for it every month. So that's significant. And it's still easy to achieve as well. So losing a grandparent would be maybe a better one. If I look at who is ranking in the top 10, I can see that most of those folks have high domain authority. This is in this column here is the domain authority here. And I'm hoping you guys can see that. I'm going to try and zoom in a little bit. But the domain authority is that ranking score by Moz that predicts how well a domain will rank. And you can see that there's a fair amount of competition, but still the indication is that this is an easy keyword to rank for, and this would be presumably a very good opportunity for her. Now, this got me thinking again, and Robbie, I don't know what you feel about that. For a podcast like this, dealing with a topic comprehensively might not be appropriate, right? Because you're having someone on your show who's dealing with grief and talking about like, hey, we want to cover like the 10 best ways to deal with that, like that might not be the right thing. But, and this is my thinking for CJ, is start a blog segment on your podcast. You're already producing content. The articles are already blog posts. So write the occasional authority post. If you had a comprehensive guide to how to deal with the loss of a loved one somewhere on your site, that could increase the traffic by a lot. And it would attract people to see, and to learn about your show and to see the fact that you have a podcast and, give you the domain authority that you're looking for and so forth. So I think that could be a strategy for you. That's sort of my last...
Jürgen, would it be necessary for it to be a blog post, or could you just have it as like the backstory as to why you started this podcast?
Excellent point. Yeah, it
and
does
so
not have
that
to
would be a very nice, it'd be a page as opposed to a blog entry, right?
Yes.
But would that count also? And then you can give your own story and you can do a lot of internal links to illustrate some of the points that the guests are talking about.
Yes, that's an excellent point. And I think it could be a page or a post. It could be a manifesto. We've seen that work a lot, right? The keto,
sure,
or the optimal health manifesto, right? And now the Wellness Connection is actually ranking on page 1 for the term optimal health, which is pretty competitive. And they did that by writing a comprehensive piece called the Optimal Health Manifesto. That was their belief set. It was what they're all about, their holistic health programs that they were describing. So similarly here for CJ, it could be something to where she would do that. And then lastly, I think that also getting the guests to backlink. CJ, if you've got an interview, if you're interviewing somebody, if you can nudge them to actually give you a mention at your show notes page that the actual episode lives on, a mention and link to from their site. Your goal as a podcaster should be that if you have a guest on, you get a link back from your guest, from that domain, from that website, because that is by far the way in which you're going to increase your domain authority the quickest.
And you'll hear that every week.
You'll hear that every
fortnight.
Yes. So cool. Good. Mark is saying he took notes and we'll explore a number of these ideas. That's fantastic. All right. So let's move on to, to the next one. And that I think is, let me just see where I'm here on my list here. I think that Scott, if you're around, I'm going to try and see whether we can dial you in and discuss some of this stuff. And have you talk about your show a little bit on Skype if you're game. So let me jump over and see whether I can somehow manage that. And Robin, if you wouldn't mind sort of checking out on the chat space and seeing whether anything is happening there that we need to address. But I'm going to jump over to the Skype and see There we go.
Sure.
Whether I can dial in Scott, and then Scott, you might need to mute you there.
No, we're just listening to you go through your signing into Skype process.
Yes, thank you. That's super exciting. This is an exciting show, isn't it?
I'm very curious about Mark and his third opinion. Oh, sorry, Mark. We're now hearing Skype.
Yes.
Wondering if, a second opinion, everyone has a second opinion. Is a third opinion meaning that you're really extra cautious?
And and I see Scott is on the podcast. And now, Scott, you'll need to give me a moment here before I can get you dialed in here so that everyone can see you.
Awesome.
Just a moment, because what I failed to do is start the virtual camera that we need for that. Just one moment. Okay. And I'm going to add Scott to our conversation here.
I can see Scott.
And I'm going to add myself as well. So, Scott, can you hear us and can we hear you?
I can hear you. I can see Robin, but I can't see you, Jürgen.
Oh, that's interesting. Oh, I see. You're still, I was hoping the virtual camera would take care of that. Hang on.
I have more hair than Jürgen, Scott.
Robin is a sight for sore eyes, so this is fine.
So Scott, still no good.
Yeah, I don't see you yet.
Yeah, this is the joy of live stuff. I'm trying to see.
Why
whether,
can you not switch me off, Jürgen?
I think it's it has to do with the well, you see it on our stream, but what Scott is not seeing that on his webcam, and I think that might be because I need to go and change his audio video settings. So guys, just bear with me for a moment. The camera is the Ecamm Live virtual cam, and now Scott, you should be seeing all of us. Is that right?
There you are.
Yeah, good.
Hey guys.
All right. Hey, good to have you on the show. Thank you for joining us. I'm super excited.
Great to be here.
And so, Scott, why don't you give us an overview of your podcast and some of the things that you're doing? And I'm just going to go split screen here for a moment. Tell us about your show. Tell us about your goals and your successes and things that you want to work on.
Sure, absolutely. Thank you, Jürgen. It's great to be here. Congratulations on this great series of programming that you've been producing over the last few weeks. I know I've enjoyed each one I've been at, and it's been incredibly valuable. So congratulations and thank you for
nice
all the great work. So in terms of what we're doing, my company, Crew West Studio, is really positioned as a content company dedicated to the creative class. And we have deep roots in visual communication, in brand communications, and the visual arts generally. We've had art galleries, we've had creative agencies. We've worked and consulted with brands for years. But our love is the arts and creative arts. And one of the insights that we've gained over the years is that most artists need help telling their stories and promoting their work. And not just locally or regionally, but at scale. And so we started thinking about how can storytelling, how can entertainment, how can media help artists tell their stories and promote their work. Now, of course, art media is a very well-established industry. There's lots of sources out there reporting on the art world. But quite frankly, a lot of those sources are quite serious in tone. It's a lot of inside baseball and can maybe feel a bit off-putting and not very accessible or friendly or fun. And so we thought we could help democratize art media with a slightly different point of view. Most artists that we know are incredibly creative, entertaining, funny people, many of them. And we thought that, maybe we could bring a different tone to the subject matter that would be inviting to the mass market, people who might be intimidated or turned off by the conventional art world. And so this phrase, so we had these ideas for a podcast, for a conference, for a grant, for a blog. but we didn't really have a brand concept to sort of tie these things together. And one day we came up with this concept called not real art. And that to us was
requires
quite
some
funny.
explanation, right? Is it?
Well,
Go and explain
if
it.
you, yeah, a lot of artists get the joke immediately, because if you think about, what artists typically do, it is in their nature to innovate and push the envelope and disrupt and challenge the status quo. And yet the conventional art world doesn't like to be challenged. And oftentimes many of the greatest artists throughout history have been told by the intelligentsia of the day, well, that's not real art, what you're doing. And so this phrase, not real art, became kind of a fun way of talking about what we're about, because we are about innovation and disruption and challenging the status quo. And it's been interesting because, of course, again, artists kind of get the joke immediately. But when I talk to gallerists or collectors or patrons or, the intelligentsia, they sort of scratch their head and
they
say,
want the real art, right?
Not real art. They don't get it, So we're not for them. We very much have a mass market, general consumer kind of mindset, where we're trying to democratize art and do it in a fun-loving way. So this name, Not Real Art, is meant to be entertaining. It's meant to be satirical. And so we launched it with a podcast. And so we thought we had this idea of having a podcast, a conference, a grant, all under this brand, Not Real Art. So we started with the podcast, and we just jumped in. We bought microphones. We started. Yeah, we just jumped in. We started recording and really positioned it as an experiment. What could we learn? What might we learn? What might we see that we wouldn't see otherwise? And so we just started producing. That was our goal. Let's just start making content. We'll worry about marketing and promotion later. And when we got, 20, 30 episodes or so under our belt, we started getting more serious about thinking like, okay, well, we've got to promote, we've got to market. And I'm a big picture guy. I'm not a detail guy. I'm a forest guy, not a tree guy. And so when it comes to SEO digital marketing, I knew that we didn't really have expertise. And so I started searching for organizations that could help us. And that's how we found you guys.
Yeah, so we've been collaborating on some really interesting work. And, and it's been, just a pleasure and honor to, be involved, because I have a background in the arts myself. And so, it was a natural fit from that perspective. But Scott, maybe we can talk a little bit about some of the initiatives, because we've run, for example, the East Coast, West Coast, middle of the country type of segmentation of the art market, and the fact that you've come up with a lead magnet, and that's, it goes to that question of what do you do with the traffic, and what do you do with people coming to your website and and expressing some interest and finding interesting content and then leaving, right? So capturing those folks' email addresses is something that we stress super highly. And so we've collaborated on, and you created, we just talked about the concept, but you guys created the Top 100 Street Artists book. It's a free download that you can get, and it's had an amazing response. We ran some Facebook ads on the East Coast, the West Coast, and the middle of the country, and you've gained through that, because every time that a new episode drops, that's 1,000 more, and you've had over 1,000. I need to go look at the stats, but I know that we've had over the last month, over 1,000 people, signing up, not just listening to your show, not just being anonymous in a way, but, have expressed interest in your topic, in your content, and they're now permanently ensconced in your email list, and you're communicating with them. So I think it's very exciting, some of the thinking that went, that and the quality of the content, the videos and everything else that you're producing, but you're able to turn that around into lead generation, or at least building some audiences that Not Real Art over the long term is going to address.
Yes. And for us, it has been very much, I hope anyway, putting first things first kind of approach. And we are finally now at a point where we can get serious about, applying these SEO best practices, whether it's lead generation through, lead magnets, these kinds of things, and starting to test various techniques or messages or what have you that might work. And we are now, as you very well know, we are now at a point where we're seeing results from our digital marketing efforts and our lead magnet effort and what have you. Now, I think moving forward, to your point, our challenge and our opportunity is, how do we engage with these people now that they've opted in, now that they've given us their email address? How do we keep, stay in their lives, engage with them in a meaningful, relevant way? And but it took time to get here. I mean, you and I have been, like with any small business, our resources are incredibly limited. We don't have a whole team of people. We don't have a bunch of money. So we've been very methodical and conservative, I think, overall in terms of our approach. But, you and I have been working together now for over a year, but we are where we are because of that work, and we're seeing very positive results of that work.
Yeah, which is awesome. I want to see whether I can switch to to your site for a moment. So here is the Not Real Art podcast, and the site, and this is actually Man One, the artist, the graffiti artist that I was talking about. So I was going to try and see whether we could maybe have that conversation around what some content that you're very excited about. You also have started using both StoryChief and KW Finder to research some of your topics. And yes, I know that you expressed interest in doing something with, for example, graffiti art, right? Maybe we could have a look here and live explore that together and talk about this idea of a content grade. What do you think about the feasibility of creating a comprehensive piece of content, long form content, for one or two of the topics that would be the right audience for you?
Yeah, I think that's great. I joined today a little bit late, so I was just hearing a bit about Topic and some of the things that you were doing with this new tool. And I look forward to learning more about that, because this idea that I could be able to research a subject prior to going into an interview,
that's exactly it.
Because that's one of my pain points. I don't have a ton of time. And quite frankly, I go into my interviews kind of blind. I just, I want the conversations to be, I'm a pretty good conversationalist, so we can get it going, but
supernatural, right? I mean, that's
but it would be nice to go in with more prep. And if there was a tool like Topic that gave me sort of, dare I say, sort of SEO optimized questions that could help me get more impact out of these interviews, that would be hugely helpful. But the graffiti art portion that you bring up came out of my SEO research. I mean, I signed up for the Mangoal tool that you advocated and showed me and used yourself. And so I started, one Saturday, was doing a bunch of keyword search. It was fascinating to me to kind of get in there and start playing. And that's, for better or worse, that's my approach. I usually jump first and then look how high it was. Could be good and could be bad. So I just jumped in one day and started searching, and, ended up searching for the term graffiti art, and saw that it was actually a pretty popular keyword. And
super
on a certain
popular.
level,
difficult too. They're not exactly easy, but yeah, go ahead.
But yeah, so, and, my business partner, Man One, who you've mentioned, who's a phenomenal artist, but he came up painting graffiti art as a kid. He ultimately went to fine art school and graduated in fine arts, and he's a very accomplished, contemporary artist. But graffiti is his root. So we have legitimate roots into graffiti culture, and so it's easy when you're drinking your own Kool-Aid and you're a part of your world. You think, oh, this is popular and this is interesting to everybody. And that's not always the case. But when I saw that keyword research, I realized like, oh, wait a minute, there's a subject here that we actually know a hell of a lot about. We have, very credible experts around this subject, and yet it's a keyword that is also popular. So I think for us moving forward, this is a great opportunity.
So Scott, I mean, if I'm looking at I'm looking at the screen here, and looking at graffiti art, 91,000 searches a month. So that's super popular, but it's also pretty difficult. If you're looking at the domain authority of the people that are ranking on page 1 for the term graffiti art, that's pretty tough. Would there be any, look at this one, would there be any chance of, for example, talking about graffiti wall art or targeting that and then still covering the topic comprehensively of graffiti overall? Is there another key phrase? Because here, if I'm looking, that's 22, 43, so the domains of the people that are in the top results for this are a little bit easier. Are there some variations of something more specifically that we could talk about? Or like, for example, famous graffiti artists, look at that.
Right.
23, that would be a great topic to talk about famous graffiti artists, cover that, have a chat with Man One, and like, hey, if you're getting a significant portion of those 4,000 people by landing on page 1 of that, that would be an interesting key phrase to get. So I'm gonna bookmark these, but what's your thinking around that? Are these too awkward or?
No, the famous graffiti artist is probably the best one of those two that you picked because, right away I sort of started thinking about creating another ebook. I mean, our ebook right now is 100 top street artists, and believe it or not, there is very much a difference between street art and graffiti art. Most people in the world don't know that. Maybe, but we do. And so the idea of famous graffiti artists is very specific. And so to create a lead magnet that would speak to that, I mean, we absolutely have the expertise, the knowledge, the connections to be able to build something very meaningful around that. Now, the other one you've mentioned, which was graffiti wall art, that's an interesting nuance because you have a lot of these companies that print this, for lack of a better way of putting it, wallpaper for your home or wallpaper for your office that looks like nature or looks like an urban setting or looks like graffiti art. And so this graffiti wall art keyword that you were mentioning, I saw, when I was looking at some of those links, I noticed that some of those companies were sort of providers of this kind of wallpaper. And that's sort of different than what we do, right?
Yeah, the way that your lead magnet top 100 top street artists is so popular, and we ran Facebook campaigns for the folks on that are watching this that know anything about Facebook campaigns. You're getting an incredibly low click rate. I mean, low cost per click, and just the interest that has been there and how many people have downloaded that from relatively small spend, has been amazing. So I think that the famous graffiti artists would be in that same vein. So why don't we look in, why don't we
jump in with a question?
Yeah, absolutely.
And you and Scott may have, had this conversation on other calls, but Scott, have you thought about doing seasons? I mean, if you were to do an entire season on graffiti art and each episode would be something very specific on that overarching topic.
Yes, I think that's the answer is yes. I've been thinking about seasonality generally as almost a workflow management approach because as I said, we sort of jumped in and we weren't concerned about SEO optimization of our podcast, so on and so forth. But what I'm learning is that for us to get the most out of the content we're producing, we have a lot more work to do in the sort of pre-production and the post-production of any one episode. And so what I'm seeing is that seasonality could help me. So for example, if I take the summer off, the summer is a hiatus in terms of releasing new episodes, but I'm producing new episodes for the fall, right? And that way I can work very carefully with each episode. Now, that leads to your point. Well, what's the subject matter for the fall? Are we going to just keep having a diverse range of guests as we have done, or are we going to dedicate ourselves to a very specific subject area? Graffiti art is absolutely one of those subject matters that we could focus on and exclusively kind of do a deep dive around over the course of many episodes. In fact, I was having that conversation the other day with somebody, actually not necessarily about graffiti art, but another genre of art called lowbrow art, which arguably graffiti might be a part of. But anyway, the answer to your question is yes, and I think that would be a very smart approach.
So why don't we jump in and actually do a little bit of work on that particular key phrase? And maybe I have a suggestion in the interest of time as well. Rick Saez from the Outdoor Biz podcast is also going to be a guest here. And I think that maybe what I'd like to do is add him to this conversation, Rick, if you wouldn't mind, because this content grading and a particular topic, we found one for Rick's podcast as well. And maybe what we could do is demo what a tool like Topic might give you for that, right? So Scott, for you, this would be let's investigate famous graffiti artists and give you a content brief that is optimized for what you might talk about during an episode like that. And Scott, I have a similar proposition for you on a key phrase that I've come across for your podcast. But first, I'd love for you to join us. Tell us a little bit about your show, and then we'll jump into that part of the demo. Would that work for everybody? Scott, would you be all right with that?
Yes.
So, Rick, let me just see whether I can jump back over to Skype and see whether I can dial him. Whether I can add him to this conversation.
Yep, Rick is saying sounds great on the chat.
So I am trying to add him in.
Perhaps you can lose me, Jürgen. Oh, we have someone 4C1 family from Taipei. Hello.
You guys hear me?
Hey, yes. Hi, Rick. How are you?
Good. How you doing?
Excellent. Let me just see how I can now add you to the camera angles here. Just one sec. While I'm still fumbling around with the, let's see, go to the grid view.
Too many grids.
Too many grids. Yes, exactly. Rick, and while I'm trying to get you on screen here, forgive my fumbling around. Why don't you tell us a little bit about your podcast, about your show, and what is up with what you're working on for the Outdoor Biz podcast? Yeah,
so I've been in the outdoor industry for over 30 years.
And actually, Rick, this is what I think the issue is that I'm not getting any video from you.
Oh, really?
Yeah, so you're just appearing as a icon. So I'm not sure whether your video camera is on or not.
Let's see. It should be on. Let's see.
So everyone on the call, just bear with us. Thank you.
Yeah, my camera's on. Display camera.
And do you see yourself on Skype?
I see myself on Skype. I don't see myself on your Skype.
Yeah, because we can hear your audio just fine, but I'm unable to hear. And I'm able to pull you up on the screen. What I'm going to do is just for the interest, you go ahead and introduce you and the podcast and your podcast. And what I'm going to do is we'll jump over. If we can get you on screen, that would be fantastic. I would love that. But right now, I'm not getting any video. I'm only getting a still image from you. And so tell us about your Outdoor Biz podcast.
Yeah, so like I was saying, I've been in the outdoor industry for 30 years as a kid on the retail floor, starting out at A16 down to San Diego, and was a sales guy, river guide, all those things. And about, I guess, 3-4 years ago now, got laid off from an outdoor industry job and thought I was over 50 years old and thought, oh my God, I'm never going to work again. What am I going to do? And I was listening to a bunch of podcasts at the time, and one of the ones I was listening to was the Tim Ferriss Show, one of my favorites. And I thought, you know what? He just interviews all the guys he runs around with in Silicon Valley and stock world and whatnot. I can interview all my buddies in the outdoor biz. And started the show about like I say, 3 years ago or so. And here it is, 200 and some odd episodes later,
Wow.
getting a lot of great feedback. But I'm not getting it's a very niche focused show and targeted right at the outdoor industry. And I'm not getting a lot of the downloads that I would like. I don't think it's mainstream facing enough. So one of the things I'm contemplating is make it more mainstream facing to increase those downloads. And then, sponsorship opportunities present themselves and stuff like that.
Gotcha.
So that's kind of where I'm at.
Uh-huh. I mean, the conventional thinking is that, niche is actually a good thing.
Yeah, that's everybody says the riches are in the niches, right?
And,
I haven't found those riches yet.
and looking at your, domain authority is in the 20s. So you should really you should be in a pretty good position to be able to, get some content onto the front pages. And it's just a question, your Alexa rank is a little surprisingly, the higher that number is, that could be, I'm curious about that. But the overarching comment is that you've got a good domain authority and the ability to have SEO be something that works for you very well. And having said that, looking at the episode ideas that you're targeting here, and looking at some of the key phrases that occur to me, you're already on page 2. For example, here's something that I did for you. I looked up outdoor podcast and variations of that. And that is, while that's in the 30s, you are in the top 2 pages. So getting that onto page 1 would actually be, here we go, Outdoor Biz Podcast. So that's you. You're in position 18 right now.
Wow.
So what might it take to get outdoor podcast to rank on page 1? And what would you need to do? So where I was going with Scott in that conversation as well around the concept of content grading is like, what would it take to write a definitive article on outdoor podcasts? What it's like being, or the outdoor industry. I think there are a few. Let me just jump back. There are a few others, and maybe you can give us some guidance as to which ones would work better, because we sort of looked through about 10.
There aren't very many. I'm pretty sure there aren't very many. It's interesting. The outdoor industry is not quick to adopt new technology. I remember when I was a sales guy back in the day, I had to get everybody to do a website. We said, look, you guys need a website. It took them forever to get websites, and now they're finally doing websites and selling online. So it took a while.
So what about ranking for something for outdoor business?
Yeah, outdoor podcast.
Like 200. I mean, that's, like that outdoor podcast, I guess, because you're an industry podcast, an outdoor podcast doesn't necessarily indicate that would be a consumer search intent, probably more. But if I'm on Google and I'm looking at, I'm searching for outdoor business, would that be closer? Who from a search intent perspective would get closest to being your ideal audience? I guess that's what I'm asking.
Well, that's what I've been playing around with too, right? Because my show covers kind of the broader reach of outdoor industry, outdoor adventure travel, camping, hiking, backpacking, skiing,
adventure travel,
fly fishing, all those things.
Yes. Like Truckee River, that was one other one that I had stumbled across.
That was a recent show.
Outdoor product design might be another one that could be kind of interesting, especially if you're interviewing someone in that. So there were a few that might be interested. Truckee River fly fishing, is that a pretty famous river out in Colorado?
I don't know how famous it is. Those guys, it's a famous river. I don't know how famous it is for fly fishing. Those guys were just on my show a couple weeks ago.
Oh, so you did that one. Okay.
Yeah.
And so, here too, 330 people look for that term, and, and look at the domain authority. There's people in their 20s. You could rank for this. So if you were to structure the Truckee River fly fishing interview with the best guides out there, or some other way in which you could formulate your podcast episode titles to cover that particular topic. And so,
yeah, I think I started using StoryChief recently
yes,
on your
awesome.
suggestion. It's been great. Yeah. And I think spending more time on cleaning up my show titles would help a ton.
And
Because
going
I've
back, I
been-
mean, you have like so many episodes now. You're going back in your back catalog and finding some that are opportunities, would also be pretty amazing, right? Because let me show you this. I'm not sure that you've seen this, and then we'll jump into sort of maybe looking at a content brief example as the last thing that we do on the shows for both of you today. But let me go to SpyFu, which is our which is a research tool that we use as well. Another one of our enterprise tricks up the sleeve. And let's look up the Outdoor Biz podcast. And so the good news for you is that you are already ranking for 56 keywords, and they are worth $100 a month.
Wow.
Right, and you're getting about 245 clicks from just having a presence on search. I don't know what happened in January, like you were even higher, therefore some episodes might have ranked. But so the strategy that I was talking about of going and focusing on the stuff that's on page 2 and getting on page 1, because it makes such a difference, right? I mean, there's nobody clicks on stuff on page 2, but they do click on stuff on page 1. So here are the key phrases that you're currently ranked for. And so if you took one of these, like outdoor gear exchange jobs, or I don't know what would be, is there one that you could see here? All of these are hovering near the first page, which is awesome, right? So these are awesome opportunities. But the question, see, these are all your episodes. So they're ranking already, you're close. Now, what could take it over the finish line is what I'm asking. And which one of these would you choose if you were to choose one?
I would probably, I can't really see those on my screen.
Oh, let me try and zoom in a bit more. Let's go through this. If you're on mobile, it's going to be tough. But Evo Rock.
There we go. No, I'm Adventure Travel.
Adventure Travel Biz. That's why I was sort of, that's interesting.
See, those are all names of brands and things, though. That's interesting.
But you're there.
Crazy Jack was the guy that climbed.
Do you take some of the traffic, right? Like, so you just like with Scott too. I think that, we had at one point a discussion around how to best integrate. Let me see whether I can find us here on.
That's good. I can see those now. Yeah, like Wilderness Exchange is a retailer. I'll go back to that in a moment. Scott, for you, the issue was that you sometimes interview famous artists. And, so what, right? If somebody Googles a famous artist and your interview comes up in the top of the search results, that's a good thing, right? And,
yes.
Right. So that's where I was going with this, so like if you chose one of these, so let's just pick one for this conversation, just for argument's sake.
Mountain Smith, because it's climbing.
Well, it's mountainsmith.com.
Yeah, that's a brand name.
Okay, right.
What about, and let me zoom out a little bit so that
Crazy Jack a brand name?
That we can see actually what the searches are. So
that's a person's name.
Look at this one. Wilderness Exchange has 3,600 people looking for it a month. Crazy Jack has 590, right? So let's pick one where, where we do that. Like Wilderness Exchange, for example, could be one.
It's a retailer. Does it matter if it's an existing business?
No, I mean, like if we were to search for Wilderness Exchange, you're there, right? I mean, so Wilderness. Let's actually Google it. If I could just spell. So here are the results that you get. Yes, you're always going to get them being on the very top of the page, but would you care if you were somewhere on this page, right? Like,
not at all. Yeah.
Like interview with the owner or something like that. You would have to make it. Here's a review site that's actually reviewing them. Wilderness Exchange, working at Wilderness Exchange from Glassdoor, so this is some of the content that exists there. But you being in position 15, I think are pretty well positioned to make something out of that. That's sort of the strategy that I would.
Yeah. So
pursue.
the strategy would be to tighten up my show title so that all those phrases were in the show title somehow.
Well, that's the only one, right? Because if I now go and look at your show title for
Okay.
that one, you remember we were talking about earlier shortening the URL,
Right.
right? Like if that was just the outdoorbusiness.com and like episodes, that goes away. 066. Don't, by the way, does that add value having the episode number in the URL?
Yeah,
No, it doesn't. You can. So I would move Wilderness Exchange to the very front, and have that just be everything, or maybe Wilderness Exchange Don Boucher, and that's it.
And this is where StoryChief helps so much when you come up with your key phrase for your slug, right?
Yeah, StoryChief has been great. Thank you for that.
So Wilderness Exchange could be an opportunity for you. So what I'd like to do for both Scott and you on this is let's actually go and jump into topic. And this is where the founder of this company will join us 2 weeks from now to talk a little bit about it. But this is what I want to do, sort of showcase as a prep work for your next interview, and also a next level beyond StoryChief, sort of, as that's basic and fundamental SEO. You're doing that right. Keep doing that. There's nothing wrong with doing that. But if you spot an opportunity where you could rank for something that has 4,000 or 5,000 visits a month, then, that might be worth pursuing. So what I wanted to do is let me go back to Scott for a moment here, and let's set up a content brief for, I think it was famous graffiti artists, Scott. Was that right? That's what we're gonna go after? And
Yes.
And then we'll jump back over, so Rick, keep thinking whether that's the right one for you or whether you have another one that you would like to try, but we could try it out. And I'll burn some of my free trial for you guys on this show. So for Not Real Art, I think that the thing that we have found was famous graffiti artists, right? So let's generate a content brief for that. So I'm going to look for, am I spelling graffiti right?
You are, yes.
Brownie points. Okay, so it's now doing its own research. All these tools have different data sets that they refer to. There's Ubersuggest, for example, which is free. There's a few others. So I generally like to, leave it and just let the tools do what they need to do or what they want to do in these. All right, it's still thinking. All right. So it's actually saying it's pretty hard. There's 1,900 people. Let's... Scott, are you able to see this? Or
I am. Yes.
I'm going to zoom in a little bit more. Are there alternatives that would be worth pursuing? There's not a lot of traffic. We might as well just go because you have the authority source, even though it says it's hard.
Yes.
Let's continue with creating a brief for famous graffiti artists, shall we?
Sure.
Or do you see one that would be just as good but is medium hard and maybe it's got a little bit less beneficial traffic for you? What do you think?
No, I say let's try famous graffiti artists. Let's just stick with that.
So it takes a while to do this, and there's a good reason for that. The reason that it takes a while is that it's now running an analysis of who is in the top 10 search results for famous graffiti artists. What are the topics that they cover? What are the key phrases that they have, and so forth and so on. And that's what we're hoping to get here. When the content brief is finishing. And so I'm not sure whether were you around for that portion? So it's working away here. It takes typically 2, 3, 4 minutes. Scott, did you see what the content briefs look like from the earlier example?
Yeah, so I dialed in right about the time you were sort of in the middle of talking about how to promote a podcast. So I got a sense of your A++ grading, and I saw some of the segments of that.
That's fair enough. Yeah. So and then we'll poke around, a little bit, because the amazing thing for me was that when I was writing this, so fair enough, it gave me these the content grader means that where I paste my article in. By the way, this sort of works together with StoryChief, right? So I remember that I didn't put in target audience. Now look, when you click through, it actually, these tools show you examples of how this is implemented in all of the sites that are ranking in the top 10 search results. How do they refer to, in this case for me, it was target audience. In your case, it would be famous graffiti artists or other kinds of related topics, right? So I got a really good set of guidelines here on what I need to do differently to fill these gaps. And I went into StoryChief and I just did it there. So that's how I got to the A++ grade, if you will. And so similarly now, we won't have an existing post to, actually with Rick we would. This episode here, the Don Bushy Wilderness Exchange episode, Rick, are you still good to try to go after Wilderness Exchange and see what the content notes would be? It's amazing. Like it's not that long a piece of content and you're ranking for it on page 2, right? I mean,
that's a long time ago. I did really short show notes, and
so you could probably easily get this one going. So while we're doing this and while we're still waiting for the content grade for Scott to come through, I'm going to create a brief for Wilderness Exchange.
I don't know if this is significant at all, Scott, but when I was having a cursory look at some of that famous graffiti artists, and then if you see New York City, Detroit, whatever, so you could do it in different cities, right? And you'd be really focusing and being very honed. It's a possibility.
That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah. New York for sure is sort of the birthplace, if you will, Philadelphia and New York. Yep.
Well,
you can get buried in this, can't you? You can just keep digging deeper and deeper as you go through these tools.
Yeah, I know that these things sometimes seem to evoke like oh my God, not another thing, not another tool, not another process, right? And I think that Brian Dean in the article in the beginning of the presentation that I was going through had mentioned that as well. It's sort of like, the early days of SEO were that you could just write some content and optimize it and Google would find it. But now the competition is such that you do have to dig a little bit deeper and be more judicious. And once you accept that and say, like, look, there are some opportunities for me to attract just the right crowd. Let me focus on 1 or 2 episodes and do that for them because I'm using these tools, I'm understanding what I have to do, and now I'm willing to invest the time because it's more likely to yield a result. So it just makes you smarter in the way that it works.
Yeah, and I wouldn't say it's competition. I'd just say just sheer content. There's so much content.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, it's not so much competition at all. It's just the volume of information we have.
So Wilderness Exchange is deemed to be semi-hard. Wilderness Gear Exchange, is that another business?
Yeah, another business.
Business. That's easy. So to be continued, right? But let's just generate the brief because it takes a while. I'm going to return to the dashboard, and Scott, yours is done. So let's look at what it's recommending for.
It's like
it's like cooking pots
to rise.
I hope you guys are okay with this. We're running pretty long in this show, but I appreciate your patience, and it's fun for me. All right, so let's have a look here. So you got a report card from the content grader. We don't have anything to grade yet because you don't have an article written, but here's what it's telling you. And let me see whether I can zoom into some of these recommendations. So the recommended word count, 1,200 words at least. That's not that bad, right? I mean, if you have a half an hour conversation with man one, that would be 2, 3, 4, 5,000 words.
Yes.
They're recommending that your content grade, in other words, if you want to supplant the people that are currently on the top of the search results, you would have to have at least a content grade of A, and probably one of A+ or better. And yeah, it's telling you that 1,900 people search for this term every way. Now, here's another piece of good news. This was interesting. The page type. What does page type have to do with anything? Well, sometimes when you try to rank for something, there might be a Wikipedia article and 5 videos, and a blog article might struggle a little bit in that case. In your case, the search results consists of 77% information articles, so that bodes well. It means that most likely you should be able to rank for this with an article. If you focus on creating an article on it, that's a good signal from my perspective. All right, so here are the posts that are in position 1 with a content grade of B, and here is how they've structured this. Okay, so that might be worth digging into or not, right? But basically what you're getting is, here's a world's top 20. So if you do the top 25 or the top 30, it gives you an idea of how can you do better, more meaningful content that's going to delight your audience, is going to answer their questions, and is going to be, you could jump into place. Now, here are some questions to answer or ask. Would these be things that you could talk to Man One about?
Absolutely.
Does he know Banksy's real name?
I'll never tell.
Oh, some secrets are meant to be left alone. Right, but so you get the idea, right? These recommendations now would give you a crib sheet for having and conducting an interview that if you were to cover all this stuff, you would get a super high content grade, pretty easily. And then here are the actual topics that you would want to cover. Well, you might have to mention New York or New York City. That's where it originated, right? But it looks there's a correlation with street art and street artists, right? So what this means is that the people that are currently ranking for this content and ranking on page 1 are using these terms 2 or 3 times in headings or inside their article, right? So 1 to 7 uses. So this means the word street art is used twice in headings, right? It could be New York street art from the 1970s. And then you use the term street art 7 more times in the article. I mean, I know this seems pretty prescriptive, but I think this would just happen naturally if you had a conversation.
Yeah, it would.
Yes. Around this, and you can go further down. So here's the competitive analysis. You can sort of see graffitiknowhow.com. So I don't know where you might slot in. Also interesting that a lot of these articles are older, and so you can try to compete on recency and relevance, and look at the content grades. You see that?
Yeah. Scroll over. I can't really see. There we go. Okay. Yeah, they're very bad.
They're bad, right? I mean, it's just not that great, right? So that's pretty cool. Right. So, I mean, I think there's all sort of encouragement and commonly cited links. Well, just not that many there, but so you get the idea. So is this valuable?
Yeah, absolutely valuable, because tools like this, as I think about, to Robin's point earlier, as I think about seasonality, what subjects or topics we should or need to be covering that are relevant for our audience, relevant for our brand. These tools allow me to make informed decisions, right, about what choices to make. Do I go left? Do I go right? Let's look it up on the tools, and that's actionable intelligence.
Yeah, wonderful. I mean, I think that's awesome. And now, what would happen as a next step is that, you would go in the content grader, and actually you can see where it says import from a URL.
Oh, wow.
Okay, so you can take the preview URL from your StoryChief article and paste it in here. That's what I was doing yesterday, right? So, because you don't even have to publish it, right? You can just write an article in StoryChief. StoryChief has a preview. That's an actual URL. Paste that in here, and it's going to grab that, and it's going to tell you it's going to tell you. And for example, street art, let's see what the examples were. Okay, so, here is how people are using the reference to street art and the artists that they're talking about. So you're getting to, I mean, obviously you're not going to copy paste. This isn't a matter of ripping anybody off. This is just, in terms of understanding what the audience is looking for and what the people who Google values are talking about. This can give you a great jump-off point, right?
Well, this is inspiring me right now to realize that we have not yet published an article about our new ebook, which is 100 Top Street Artists. Right. So now I can see, wait a minute. Sure. We put the book out. It's doing great for us, but we could throw gas on the fire if we publish an article based on this intel.
So I think that's a really interesting point of view, because I think that podcasting and blogging and what we're doing here for a site as a whole, sort of play together really well. It's not that you do one or another. I mean, again, I'm coming from a point of view where, this will help your podcast. It will gain you subscribers. And it's, writing a blog post and an article that is, a great piece of content can make people aware of the fact that you also have a podcast to offer. So for the folks that are hardcore type podcasters on the call, on the show, I think that would be sort of my, lesson, sort of not lesson, but but that I like that aspect of it. Well, shall we see whether the Wilderness Exchange one came through? Yes, it has. So let me open that. Okay, so Rick, here you go. Here's your game. Here's your game plan. 907, but roughly 1,000 words. Recommended content grade A. So you don't even need an A+. You don't need an A++. One little fly in the ointment might be that only 19% of the top search results are in fact articles. And I'm not sure, maybe we need to look at the Wilderness Exchange search result again. So this is first one was an ad. This is their homepage, fair enough. This is Facebook, so it's social. This is Yelp. This is Instagram. And then Glassdoor, I'm not exactly sure. So, it might be because of that, that an article might have a bit harder time breaking in. But let's keep going and see what...
well, it sounds like they've done some really good promotional work for their brand.
Yes. I mean, you would expect this, right?
Absolutely.
That you would expect that.
Yeah, they're pretty good. They're a pretty good retailer in the space, too. I'm not surprised by that.
But you're on page 2, it's like a...
yeah, right.
So... well, interesting. No questions to answer. I mean, so there's no questions being asked about the term or the word Wilderness Exchange. I guess that's also having to do with the nature of a brand. But the topics to cover, okay, so this makes sense, right? Outdoor gear, 3 year for uses, backcountry skiing, outdoor pursuits. So these may still give you, if you had an interview with the CEO or you were to go back and actually update this, if you guys talked about any of that, putting these things as headings, like outdoor pursuit, backcountry skiing, the great purveyors of outdoor gear. Could you see yourself creating some headings with these key phrases in them?
Oh, exactly. I could go back and take those show notes and the transcription and turn it into a completely new set of show notes that would also show up as a post.
So anyway, that's the concept, so to speak, is in the idea of starting to go beyond just length and focusing on content grading, to try to go through your back catalog or to prepare for your next interview and to, and if you know this from KW Finder research already, if for example, let's see, Truckee River fly fishing, I'm not sure how many of these might be articles versus, other type content, right? But I think that the list that we created for you with some of the key phrases, let me just see where that was. Must have been here on one of our pages. My computer is getting a little slower here, presumably.
Well, this is huge just in preparation for a future show or future interview. You go in there and run it through this, then it kind of guides you on what to talk about, what questions to ask, what topics to cover. That's huge.
I mean, this one here, the best outdoor clothing brands with 1,200 searches and a relatively low difficulty. Like that would be, I mean, these I suspect would be all articles. So we're still thinking about this. I'm going to report back next week to
2 weeks.
2 weeks from now to
May
see
16th
what
is the next
impact,
one.
whether my post has moved up by then. I mean, I think it'll take 4 weeks, a month maybe for it to trickle up into page 1. I'm hoping that it will. But that was sort of the area of focus for us this week. So any questions from the audience, from folks who have joined us? Did we leave anything out, Robbie? What am I missing?
We had one new podcast pop up called 4Cs 1 Family, which is a beautiful name, and it's from Taiwan. I mentioned that, I think, from and it's an American guy living there, and it's geared to expats.
Oh, awesome!
So,
okay.
But he's kind of growing. He's got a lot of shows and growing a strong presence on YouTube and restarting his podcast. So this is Thomas, I think. Yep. And
cool.
And maybe, you might like to go to our page and sign up and be part of this conversation in 2 weeks' time.
Yes, Thomas. So just in case you missed it, is that just go to polymash.com/live and you could submit your podcast
James
details.
Thomas, his name is. James Thomas, yeah.
Hey, James, you could submit and, put some episode ideas, send us some more information about your show, and then, we could have a closer look, kind of like what we did today.
What you're seeking to achieve,
so,
right?
Well, with that, I think, we're running at 4:00 now. We've had this show on for 2 hours. It's been awesome and kind of fun. I hope you guys got a lot out of it. And, I'm really appreciating both Scott and, and Rick dialing in. I wished Rick, I'd been able to pull your video camera up, and I just, still only seeing your icon and not your video broadcast. So I'm sorry.
Be a setting on my end. I still see it on me on Skype. It's got to be a setting. I'm not clicking.
So we'll work on that.
Yeah, we'll work on that for next time, because we've had 4 or 5 people on Skype before. I know it does work, but cool. So what I will do is I will send you guys the PDF version.
There he is.
What?
There it is. How you guys doing?
Oh, there we go. Okay,
How's
so
that?
hang on. So I can now add you, right? That was the setting. There we go.
Awesome.
I just clicked the icon. I had it on icon, not full screen. So there you go.
Oh, excellent.
If that happens in the future, tell them to go click the icon.
Click the icon.
Okay.
That's it. Okay.
That's
so
a
simple.
great tip. Thank you.
It's the
Sorry about that.
simplest
At least we
piece of
figured it out.
advice we've had today, right?
Yeah, right.
So are there any outstanding questions, any insights anyone wants to share before we say goodbye?
Like, we can, and look, we love having guests
Thank you.
back
This is
as well.
great.
Yeah. So, like the, having, so where I was going is that I was going to create the reports from the content briefs for you guys and send those out via email and share them with you. And I'm hoping that they can be of some use. Scott,
Thank
you
you.
and I mean,
Yes,
since
thank you.
we're collaborating ongoing anyway, we can discuss a little bit further how we would work this in. I'm very excited about, having Rio, I think his name is, the founder of Story. There are like 3 or 4 platforms, ClearScope and a few others. They're not inexpensive. We're thinking from an agency perspective, we're considering offering this as a service, to say, look, we're going to create you a pack of 5 content briefs, and we'll do the research, and we'll think about what content that lingers on page 2 could work for you if you were moving it to page 1 because people are searching from it. It's got low difficulty, and you already have some content for it, and or for future episodes. So we're actively thinking about how could this be made better. And I think Rio 2 weeks from now will come back with some suggestions on reformatting this for podcasters, in terms of interview questions or anything like that. So I'm very excited about doing that 2 weeks from now.
That's great.
Right.
So so with that, shall we ring out the show for today? I'm going to sign off here, and we're going to stop the live stream in a minute. I want to thank everybody, again, who joined us. It's just been awesome on the chat as well. We didn't get to all the applications, obviously, but I'm hoping that what we did cover today will give everybody some good ideas. So, with that, it's Jürgen signing off for this time. Bye for now.
Thank you.
Thank you.